In this video, I'm going to talk about this nice and compact ITX gaming PC. Now, it is well known that ITX systems are a bit harder to build because of the lack of space, and they can cost a lot more because smaller parts are somehow more expensive than when you're building a typical ATX system. But that is not always the case. So today, we're going to talk about this system right here that was easy to build and that isn't that expensive. So let's go over the parts, let's talk about this build as a whole, and most importantly, let's see what kind of a performance does it offer. Let's begin. The focus point of this gaming build is definitely the RTX 4070 Super Twin X2 from Inno3D. It is the best value RTX chip to go for at the moment because it offers a lot of raw performance, but if you want to push it even further and game at higher resolutions as well, you have NVIDIA's DLSS and frame generation features that will give you that extra boost you need. But there are two reasons why this specific card is especially interesting. The size, because it has one of the most compact cooler designs on the market, making it perfect for smaller ITX builds. And the price, because it is one of the cheapest RTX 4070 Super models you can buy right now. So when I decided to make this ITX build and I was looking around to see what parts would fit best, I contacted Inno3D and they instantly wanted to be a part of this. They sent this card over and they even offered to sponsor this video. So before I start, I just want to thank them for being so cool about all of this. Anyway, to make a small ITX PC, you first need to have a small ITX case. And this time around, I went with DeepCool's CH160. It is compact, it looks really nice and unobtrusive, it has a very simple yet elegant layout, and while cooling is usually an issue with smaller cases that don't have enough space for proper airflow, this all-mesh design should be able to keep your system nice and cool. But I'm going to talk about performance a bit later in this video. Now, the coolest thing about this case right here is that it will only cost you about 60 euros here in Europe, which is definitely on the lower side. But don't worry, the build quality and the whole impression of this case is not that different from more popular options like the NR200 from Cooler Master, for example, or even the 2000D from Corsair. And if you're feeling very inspired, you can also make your own pixel art with these little dots that you will have to purchase separately. Now, the biggest downside of this case is that DeepCool is having some issues with their supply to the United States, but from what I've heard, they are working on it and they do expect to see their products available again in the near future, hopefully. So for now, I'm actually going to put some alternative case suggestions in the description box down below for all of you that do live in the US and want to build something similar to this. Since this is a compact gaming build, I went with the Ryzen 7 7800X3D processor. Now, I got the new 9000 series quite late and I didn't get to test it just yet, and as you probably know from the reviews last week, Intel's new Core Ultra CPUs aren't that great for gaming. For the motherboard, I went with the cheapest B650 board that I could find that happened to be the Gigabyte B650i AX. Now, ITX motherboards do cost a bit more than the ATX model of the same line, so this one is pretty basic, but it should still comfortably hold the 7800X3D and it should offer enough of connections for a typical gaming PC. Now, the only real limit here is a single NVMe SSD slot, so make sure you get enough of storage right away, or maybe get some SATA storage if you want to add more later. So for that reason, I went with a 2TB SSD right away, and honestly, for a gaming PC, you can just buy whatever decent model is available for a good price in your region at the moment of your purchase. Memory-wise, a good 32GB DDR5 6000 kit will cost you about $100 or euros nowadays, so going for a slower 16GB kit for a bit less is not really worth it, in my opinion. So I went with the same Corsair Vengeance LPX I use quite often because it is affordable, it has a low profile well, so it doesn't interfere with most coolers on the market. And I've never had any compatibility issues, both with Intel and AMD, so it is definitely one of my go-to kits. And speaking of coolers, I always try to brand match the cooler with the case I'm using, if that's possible, of course, and if that's reasonable, of course. So in this case, I went with the DeepCool AK400 Dark Plus that will only cost you about 40 euros. Again, with DeepCool unavailable in the US right now, I will list a few similar alternatives in the description box down below. To power the whole system up, I went with the Seasonic Focus SGX power supply. It's the right size for these builds, it's quiet, it's efficient, it's reliable, and it comes with a 10-year-long warranty. Now, I had a 750 watt model here already, but both the RTX 4070 Super and the Ryzen 7 don't use that much power, and 650 watts would probably be more than enough if you're going to build something similar. And this is the result. It was a super easy build to put together. The case isn't big, but it is just one open space, which makes it very easy to work in. The GPU has plenty of space, and since the case doesn't offer that much in terms of cable management, you also don't need to worry about it at all. You just bundle a few cables tightly in the front, use some tie wrap or some Velcro strips, and you are done. If you game on a 1080p resolution, you can expect to run everything easily, even those heavier titles with ray tracing like Formula 1 2023 or Cyberpunk 2077, for example. So with a system like this one, you're going to want to pair it with a nice 1440p monitor because those extra pixels will add a lot to the whole gaming experience, and you will have enough power to run it. On 1440p, most games will sit in the 144 FPS range, with lighter games running a lot faster, and the heaviest of titles will still pull a comfortable 80-ish FPS, and that's without DLSS upscaling enabled. With DLSS, however, and with or without frame generation enabled, depending on the game you want to play, you will get a lot more. So even Alan Wake 2 or Cyberpunk 2077 could be played in all their full path traced glory. With DLSS and frame generation enabled, you will get about 126 and 103 FPS respectively on 1440p and a bit more than 150 FPS on 1080p. So it works perfectly fine even if there are several RTX cards positioned above this 4070. NVIDIA's latest full ray tracing title, Black Myth Wukong, is extremely hard to run, which means that upscaling is pretty much a requirement for this game. If you run it on the cinematic quality setting with every RTX setting at its highest, you're going to need a 4090 to play the game smoothly, and that card costs more than this whole entire system. So to get a nice balance between image quality and performance, I ran it with full ray tracing on medium quality with DLSS frame generation on, which worked well on 1440p, and I got 117 FPS on average with 1% lows at 87 FPS. Now, this might seem a bit high, but remember that Wukong is a fast-paced game, and with frame generation on, that does increase the latency a bit. You do want to aim for a bit more than typical 60 FPS here. If you turn full ray tracing and frame generation off and just play on high settings with only upscaling enabled, you will get similar FPS numbers. Now, the game will feel a little bit smoother because of the slightly lower latency, but you will lose most ray tracing effects. And finally, I managed to get Star Wars Outlaws in time for this video. Now, I haven't had time to really play it just yet, but I did want to include it in these graphs. So, on high settings, with ray tracing effects and DLSS on quality mode, this system managed to get 94 FPS on average with 74 FPS 1% lows on 1440p. And about 107 FPS on 1080p resolution. Now, the game does have a frame generation option as well, but I don't think it is necessary to enable it here. Now, obviously 4K resolution is where it gets a bit tougher, but that's what 4080s and 4090s are for. But still, because of DLSS upscaling, 4K gaming is still somewhat doable on this system. While some games will work fine natively as well, the heavier titles will require DLSS upscaling to go over 60 FPS with this build. Now, in terms of thermal performance, running just a CPU stress test with the noise limited to 40 decibels decibels at a 50 centimeter distance. The CPU does get warm, but the AK400 manages to keep the 90-ish watts from the CPU under control. But at about 120 watts is where the cooler starts hitting its limits. Now, the case remains under 40 degrees and the VRMs stay under 70 degrees Celsius, which means that even though VRMs are not really the focus point of this budget motherboard, they are more than enough for this CPU under load. While gaming and playing Cyberpunk 2077, which fully stresses the GPU and uses the CPU more than most other games, again with the noise limited to 40 decibels, the CPU was using about 72 watts and running in the mid-60s, while the RTX 4070 was using 219 watts with the core temps at 70, hotspot at 83, and memory at 70 degrees Celsius. So again, completely comfortable performance. But the internal case temperature was a bit high for my liking. Now, I really like to keep 40 degrees Celsius as a sort of a soft target limit, especially for a case that's pretty open and should be well ventilated. So I took the second fan from the AK400 cooler because it comes with two fans, and then I used it as an intake fan in the front of the case, which really improved the thermals. The case, the motherboard, the chipset, the memory, even the GPU ran several degrees lower. And all it took was to move one fan I already had to a different spot. So if you do go for this case, I really do think you should add at least one intake fan, or just do what I did and grab a CPU cooler with two fans and then use one of those. And that's it. I think this little and very portable build turned out really well, both in how it looks and how it performs. Other than a small premium for the motherboard and the SFX power supply, there's no big price consideration compared to a similarly spec'd ATX build. Now, as always, I'm going to put all the parts in the description box down below with the current prices and also with some alternative suggestions. And before I go, I want to thank Inno3D once again for sponsoring this video. So if you're building a small SFF system, you should definitely check out their twin X2 models. Plus, I think that any GPU that sells for about 10% under MSRP while still performing just as well deserves at least a little bit of love and at least a little bit of attention. Now, that is all I had for today. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did and you want to see more content like this one, please do consider clicking that subscribe button down below so you never miss my future uploads. Bye guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!